started this about 4 or 5 years ago because it struck me at the time that this college has had a very strong tradition of faculty being here for their entire careers. In fact, we acknowledged yesterday at the opening meeting of Professional Day 4 faculty that are leaving a total of 144 years of service to CCM. And we have Professor Murphy here with 39 years of service to CCM. You still didn't make that 40 mark.
No, it's too bad. You can beg, but I'm not going to do it.
You will be an adjunct, right?
Just this summer.
Oh, okay. Sure. But we thought it'd be a great opportunity to allow the faculty who are leaving, who've given so much to the college, to share their wisdom with us as they change their path in life. And so we're pleased to have Professor Murphy here. And I will acknowledge you're the very first last lecture that actually has technology as appropriate concerning research. So without further ado, Professor Murphy.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Benny.
Yes,
When Dwight invited me to give a last lecture, I was flattered, but then realized I actually had to put something together to present to you, my colleagues and friends. I told Dr. Smith I would be most comfortable talking about my personal journey to and through CCM. For many of you, this will be a blast from the past, and hopefully each of you will remember one or more names as we travel. If some of the images don't quite fit the time periods, I apologize. We tried to sync them as best we could. There is nothing that irks me more than individuals who suffer with iitis. Unfortunately, in this situation, there is no way to avoid it, so my apologies as I begin. I didn't count the number of times I say I, but boy, there are a lot, so forgive me. As a child of the 50s and 60s, a boomer, I remember my childhood as fun and wonderful. I am the oldest of 7 with 1 sister and 5 brothers. I did very well in grade school with only a couple of hiccups. Not taking the direction of my 2nd grade teacher who wanted me to be a righty. I remain a lefty, and some would say in more ways than one. Wearing a sandwich board in the 7th grade announcing my devotion to the Beatles as they arrived in the US. Mr. Inglis, my history teacher, just didn't get it. And lastly, receiving my 1st grade of C. It was in music because, unlike Professor Clay Allen, I was unable to carry a tune even in a paper sack. As a member of a family of 9, the only family vehicle I really remember is a giant station wagon, the precursor to National Lampoon's Family Truckster. We had various colors and models over the years: a Chevy, Pontiac, Olds, ice blue, gold, and blood red. As the oldest, I sat in the back and spent my growing up years looking at where I had been, much like I'm doing today. I remember clearly one family trip to Florida. My youngest brother, who was not yet 2 years old, sat in a car seat that was simply flung over the seat back. He sat in the front between Mom and Dad on a plaid seat that had a horn and steering wheel. I'm sure many of you remember that car seat model. But can you imagine today your grandchildren or children sitting with a panoramic view of a windshield? Not today. I, on the other hand, monopolized the entire back area of that station wagon, a very testy 14-year-old. A sidebar, that not yet 2-year-old brother just retired from the U.S. Air Force at the rank of Chief Master Sergeant in March of this year, after an exemplary 30-year career. In high school, my main focus was my husband of almost 42 years. He was the co-captain of the football team, and I was the adoring cheerleader. So cliche and corny as I think of it now, but we were in love. In other words, I was an okay student. As graduation approached, I wondered what the heck I was going to do for the rest of my life. My very conservative, traditional dad felt that higher education would be needed by my 5 brothers and that my sister and I would marry and live happily ever after. Although the happily ever after turned out to be true, I was really prepared to do nothing of any import after graduation. Luckily, CCM had opened the year before and was ready and waiting for me. I enrolled as a secretarial science major. This confused my electrical engineer dad, who just couldn't understand how my major could be considered a science when there were no weekend 4-hour labs in the program. I remember at registration moving from table to table, gathering cards that represented seats in classes, turning in the cards, and getting my tuition bill of $162.50. That may have seemed like a real bargain, but the purchase of a car was necessary for me to make it from Butler to CCM and back. Lucky me again. I tooled to and from CCM in a gorgeous aqua blue 64 Ford Falcon with a white rag top. She was a real beauty. See for yourself. How about those wheels, Venny? When I entered CCM, Rosemary Freeling, whom some of you might remember, was chairperson of secretarial science. Rosemary was from Minnesota and had a very pronounced, I can't do it, but I'll try, Minnesotan accent. In addition, she was an early fashionista who had a pair of knee-high boots to match every dress or suit she wore. Her husband, Donald, was a vice president at McGraw-Hill Publishing, and I remember how in awe we were during a field trip to McGraw-Hill when we met the authors of our textbooks. For many years, I had a pleasant relationship with the author of the Gregg Reference Manual, a grammar and writing style manual, William Sabin, and looked forward to my signed copy of each revision of the manual until Bill's death in 2008. Other professors that I had as a student and that many of you may have known over the years include Skip Tullen, Ed Cifelli, Terry West, Jim Duffy, Beth Hess, and Charlie Selingut. Each one of them touched me in some way, and I am grateful to have had them as early classroom role models. Cooperative education was a requirement for my major. I remember going to Llewellyn Farms. How many here remember Llewellyn Farms? Or the drive-in theater on Route 10. Well, I remember Llewellyn Farms and our celebration luncheon there, at which Dean Gallo was the guest of honor. At this time, June Scott was an instructor in the department and was one of my instructors as well. I remember, too, being involved in the on-campus club, the Office Education Association. Members of our chapter traveled to Indianapolis for a national competition. To my surprise, I placed first in the job application competition. As I told Dr. Yaw in my retirement letter, this was a really big deal for a Jersey girl from Butler. Our documents were typed on Selectric typewriters using carbon paper for the required copies. The requirement was that there were to be no errors on the resume. What pressure. I did graduate from CCM in 1971 and had a job as a legal secretary at a partnership in Denville. The firm is still there. The job and people were great. However, I was given an opportunity that would set the course for my career. In September of 1971, I joined the Secretarial Science Department as a laboratory assistant. The 2 labs for the program were where Academic Affairs resides today. Between the two labs was an office that housed the faculty and supplies for the program. In September of the next year, 1972, Marilyn Ayres joined the department, and I got married that October. Two life-changing events in a very short period of time. Aww. Wanting to be an instructor and professor, I went on to complete my education at Montclair State and served as an adjunct in CCM's Secretarial Science Department as I did so. At Montclair, I was fortunate to have had national leaders in business education as professors, some of whom I still see from time to time. It was during this time that our children were born, and I applied for a full-time position at CCM with Eleanor Flanagan as chair. Another ah? Ah, okay. At that time, the college sponsored an on-campus child care center for students, staff, and faculty. Patrick and Kelly, our children, both attended the center, which was located directly across from our department offices in DeMere Hall. Very convenient. When I joined CCM as a full-time instructor in September 1979, I shared an office in DeMere Hall with Rhoda Jacobs, Jean Bonney, Harold Pearl, and Larry Peterson. We had a great time. One summer, a consulting opportunity arose to commute to Bank of America in the financial district of Manhattan. I commuted in 2 days a week to help set up a self-paced training program for BOA's employees. The best part of this experience, aside from the extra money, was the fact that I was able to commute in with one of my brothers who worked for Sprint that was then located on Chambers Street. I vividly remember taking the tube into the World Trade Center and shopping at Macy's at 8 a.m. I thought of Janet. In these early years, we had terrific students in our classes like Linda Fogarty, Carol Shea, S.B. Kane, Arlene Cervenka, and Sally Beastie, Pat Beastie's wife. We taught them a secret written language called shorthand. Today, you might find some of us from the cult still using it in meetings. Oops. Also during that time came the advent of word processing. In those early days, the magnetic card selectric typewriter, or MCST, was the system we used for instruction. Coincidentally, Eleanor Flanagan, our department chair, had written 2 books for use in instruction. We had 6 systems housed in a small room on the first floor of Cohen Hall. We had a class of 15 packed into that tiny room as we demonstrated and taught the new application. Today's fire marshals would have been overcome and issued several citations. The Secretarial Science Department changed its name to better reflect the changes in technology impacting it. The new department name was Office Systems, and soon there was a new chairperson, Marilyn Ayres. Marilyn was and is a visionary and embraces technology with a bear hug. The department worked to stay on the cutting edge through grant writing. Late afternoons, evenings, and weekends were spent collaborating and writing to meet deadlines. Office Systems secured the first PC network for teaching on campus, an IBM Token Ring. We implemented desktop publishing through a certificate program using the first version of Aldus PageMaker. In that first class, John Murray and Carl Rao were students. I remember during testing and quiz periods, John would sit quietly and mom. And can you believe it? None of the students complained. But anyway. By that time, word processing had advanced to not only the PC, but to shared logic systems such as the Wang OIS. Each of us in Office Systems was very involved in teaching for community and professional programs. I remember the Saturdays I spent in the labs and remember Marilyn teaching Wang word processing beginning on Friday night, continuing all day Saturday, and finishing up on Sunday afternoons. Phew. So many of the wonderful support staff were attendees at today's office or at special workshops run through Human Resources. We always enjoyed their participation and their friendship. Things were changing rapidly. The corporate headquarters in our area were undergoing change as well. As layoffs began at Warner Lambert, the college assisted in training or retraining employees. Several of us taught in a classroom that was set up in the manufacturing area. I remember walking the designated pathway to the training room past the giant tumblers of pills as they were being manufactured. Retraining and retooling were repeated at Hewlett-Packard, Exxon, and other corporate headquarters as the complexion of Morris County continued to change. One of the highlights in office systems continued to be cooperative education. And at one time, the county's corporate offices were dotted with administrative assistants and executive assistants that had been students in either secretarial science or office systems, much as nursing sees today in area hospitals and medical offices. Cooperative education was still the capstone for the program, but the celebration luncheon had moved to Rods at the Madison Hotel. I remember Donald and Michael Yaw visiting their dad as he was always at the luncheons to greet our guests and congratulate our graduates. Another sea change. Morris Leaf retired and Marilyn Ayers applied and was selected as Dean of TME, which later morphed into BMET. I then applied for the office systems chairpersonship and was selected. There is a funny story that I could tell you about purple Pendaflex and lilac file folders, but I will hold that for another time. Oh, why not do it now? There is no time like the present, and I won't have another opportunity to give a last lecture. So here goes. At CCM, it was assumed that there was equality among the sexes. In some venues on campus, that was not always the case. As a new chairperson, I was focused on organizing myself and making the office work for me. Part of my plan was to update the filing system and to use the color coding that had recently come into vogue, not just labels, but folders and Pendaflexes as well. So I put together my purchase order for lilac folders and purple Pendaflexes. That's a tongue twister. My order got to the dean's desk for approval and came back with a Post-it that asked me if this was the image that I really wanted to present to others. Well, being very in tune with the dean, now as then, I realized that perhaps blue and green might be better choices. The dean and I laughed today, and I delight in reminding her of the incident, especially now as my granddaughter's name is Violet. The department offices moved from windowless DeMare Hall to the back hall of Cohen, where there was sunlight. The department was composed of dedicated, dynamic women. Carol Holden, Marilyn Kennedy, Anne Marie Shanley, Myrna Rosendi, June Scott, Eileen Grandy, and Cindy Gilbert. During this time, our excellent students included Christy Giuseppe and Jackie Sharp, among others. Around this time, Joe Nazaro asked me to participate in this I Started Right campaign. Poor grammar aside, it was flattering to be asked and really fun to participate. As dean, Marilyn oversaw the planning, outfitting, and opening of the high-tech building. I remember our field trip to office furniture showrooms in search of the perfect tables for the teleconference room. For some time, this room was the primo spot on campus for holding any type of meeting. The room was further enhanced by Jim Gwynn's beautiful painting of technology and the environment. TME division meetings took place at the Liberty Science Center, at the Sarnoff Center, and on a party boat on the Navesink River. Every one of these meetings had a theme, a purpose, and an agenda. TME was involved in so many exciting projects. In our department, partial responsibility for the CAS program for Central American and Caribbean students was housed, as was the Triangle Van project that provided these students with transportation to and from the campus, their host family homes, and special trips developed for them. Grant writing continued, and monies were received for Able Desk that provided training for students from Cheshire Home and Matheny Medical and Educational Center, and for a bilingual office assistant program. Again, opportunity came knocking, and I chose to apply for the directorship at the Center for Teaching Excellence for the 1994-96 term. So much was happening during this time technologically. Use of email across campus was just beginning, and I remember that Charlie Selingut's daughter was in Israel. He came down regularly to use my PC connection to email her, and I always enjoyed his visits. Use of the PC and Microsoft Office software was beginning to be introduced to office staff and faculty. Dr. Yaw graciously accepted my request to teach a session on MS PowerPoint. As you may know, he remains an avid techie to this day. Other exciting projects during my term as director included Keith Smith discussing hope and healing, Alan Levin's friend, Frank Todd, plunging us into Antarctic splendor with a special presentation, Terry Anderson, who discussed his memoir, Den of Lions, about being the longest-held American hostage of the Lebanese Civil War, and brown bag lunches that were facilitated by Charlie Selingut, Jana Eber, and a host of other distinguished faculty. A variety of workshops were given by another group of faculty and professional staff, including Joan Cook, Jim Duffy, Carol Holden, Noel Robinson, John Rugini, Joe Sauter, Mary Scarta, June Scott, Chuck Spiridon, Joanna Staskis, Karen Vanderhoof, Jill Wells, and Ed Winchester. The Journal of New Jersey Poets had a home in CTE under the watchful eye of our dear Sandy Zuloff, and I enjoyed working with him as well. Another activity that was meaningful to me was the Share Our Strength Writers Harvest, and although it did not generate as many donations as I had hoped, it was wonderful to have so many English faculty volunteer to read their own work as well as the works of their favorite poets and authors. In addition, CTE sponsored a series of cultural bus trips that included a trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, during which Mel Weissman gave us a history lesson through the Greek and Roman art collections. Maria Lane Mammon, who arranged a special tour of the Metropolitan Opera House. Lucky for us, we observed orchestra auditions that were being held the day we visited. Parthy Iyengar, who guided us through Little India and Queens and took us to an Indian wedding. Larry Peterson, who arranged a private tour of the Stock Exchange in Wall Street. And Jim Gwynn, who acted as our tour guide to the Frick Collection and the Whitney Museum, which few of us had ever visited. We hosted John and Sue Ann Roosh and Mark Milliron of the League for Innovation in the Community College during this time, and began giving NISOT awards from the League to nominated faculty. During my tenure, I was fortunate to travel to many conferences, either as a presenter, co-presenter, or participant. Cities I visited included Columbus, Lancaster, Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia, Ocean City, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Austin, San Diego, Seattle, Fort Lauderdale, Asheville, Orlando, New Orleans, Miami, Pittsburgh, Hartford, Kansas City, and San Juan. Cliff Wood used to say there wasn't a city I wouldn't visit. And he's probably right. I worked with a terrific group of people while in Henderson Hall in academic affairs as CTE director. Cliff Wood, Judy Ralph, Carolyn DeCastro, Jim Hunt, Ralph England, Jackie Sharp, Marilyn Hoffman, Janet Kroll, Mary Tardivi, Linda Lauer, Mary Hapgood, and Joe Calgene. This was a hard-working, lively office. I hope lively describes the office accurately. The next stop for me was the newly formed Department of Media that was developed to answer the advent of what was termed new media. This new department was a hybrid of an academic department and a support department. For the 5.5 years I was chair, My supervisors were Marilyn Ayers for the academic part of the position and John Cohn for the support function. Online teaching was beginning to come into fashion, and CCM piloted using WebCT as a course management system. Several faculty took sections of a pilot course to test out the new delivery mode. It was a little unsettling when you knew Drs. Yaw and Wood were possible students during your section. After the pilot, Sarah Pfaffenroth and I developed 2 courses that were the first online offerings at CCM, Creative Writing and Multimedia 1. Guess who taught what? What an exciting time watching social media take shape and learning the tools and applications that supported it and new media. In addition to having the office with the best view on campus, which is Joe Shilp's now, it's a beauty. Here again, I was blessed to have worked with a wonderful supportive group of people. Joe Sauter, Ethan Shapiro, Carol Holden, Ray Kalis, Dick Watt, Stan Wazalewski, John Mitro, George Kramer, Ken Leary, and Cindy Gilbert. Joe Sauter was such a visionary and such an energetic person. He was a good friend and left an indelible mark on me and on this campus. Joe and Marilyn Ayers were always on the cutting edge of technology and were among the founders of NJ Edge, a powerful state consortium which remains a driving force for campus technology. An important focus during this time was the acquisition of the cable head end from Cablevision. Drs. Yost, Joe Sauter, and others spent many hours in negotiations to bring the channel to the campus. Probably even more exciting than the cable head end coming here, I remember, was Joe Sauter, who was just beside himself that he was going to be, or we were going to be, the first department that had Herman Miller Aeron chairs for the console and the cable head end. Always a trendy guy, that Joe. Morris Educational Television continues today as programs are produced in and broadcast on Channel 77 from the Media Center. I remember clearly September 11, 2001. I was pulling into Lot 8 as 2 World Trade Center fell. At that time, we still had a closed-circuit television system across campus, and upon request, the system was activated and available throughout the campus for those wishing to follow the tragic events of the day. The media staff traveled from room to room, turning on monitors and projectors. I remember so many students who had parents who traveled into the city, and the fear on their faces and concern they expressed. I am an avid supporter of the CCM Peace Prize and congratulate and thank Peter McGuire for its creation and continuation. Today, the 9/11 Memorial Museum is being dedicated, and I am looking forward to visiting it soon. The site itself is beautiful and is such a solemn place. In early 2002, opportunity knocked once again. I was asked to consider applying to be the chairperson of Information Technologies. With some encouragement, I did. I was relieved that the academic programs in Media 2 came to IT. Upon assuming the role of IT chair, there were 40 adjuncts. I made it my mission to observe all 40 that spring, and I did. Then IT enrollments were slapped with the fallout from the dot-com bust. I am glad to say that IT is once again in the black and is predicted to be so well into the next decade. In 2005, our daughter Kelly was diagnosed with cancer. During her battle, I had an army of angels who helped me through my day-to-day activities. My angels included Marilyn Ayers, Joan Monahan, Judy Ralph, Carolyn DeCastro, Annette Kapaka, Roseanne Mayone, and Michelle Rowe, among many other friends and relatives. I am pleased to report that Kelly is almost at the 10-year survivor mark. Once again, an exciting project was presented to me for participation. I was asked to chair CCM's 40th anniversary year celebration. The steering committee developed an agenda that included 40 different activities to be held throughout the academic year. It was a busy, joyous time at CCM, and it was wonderful to work with Dr. Yaw, Joe Vitale, Denise Bell, Colleen McCardle, Joe Weisberg, Peter Mancuso, Barbara Kapsoris, Dan Wills, Dave Smith, and Trish McGrath, among many others, to see the 40 activities come to life. It was my plan to attend all 40. I think I made it to 35. In recent years, I have again benefited from the support of a wonderful dean, Patrick Enright. After recovering from my retirement news, he has been very gracious to me. Not that he hasn't always been gracious. Let's clear that. Thank you, Patrick, for your support and friendship. And thank you, too, Dwight, for your friendship and respect. I thank you, too, for the wonderful tour of the French Quarter you gave me when we were at the AAC&U conference there in New Orleans. And Dr. Yaw, thank you for giving your best to CCM and for helping to make it the excellent institution it is. You have maintained a high standard of professionalism and dedication and serve as a role model for us all. The Department of Information Technology's enrollments, as I alluded to earlier, are currently strong. Over the past decade, the department has survived 5 retirements: Pauline Pike, Ed Winchester, Kathy Coladas, Anne-Marie Shanley, and Carol Holden. Current members of the department continue to spend their summers learning the next version of lab software or the features of the latest hardware to hit the market. Personally, I've been through 5 versions of Windows and 5 versions of Microsoft Office, as well as a host of other software applications and hardware innovations. It is always amazing to me just how visionary some individuals are. In 1995, Joe Sauter, Marilyn Ayres, and I marveled at Bill Gates, who wrote in his book, The Road Ahead, that we would eventually hold our worlds in the palms of our hands. That has indeed happened with the invention and proliferation of the smartphone. I will continue to love technology and leave the IT department in the capable hands of Annette Kapaka, Nancy Banowski, June Scott, Neil Blum, Pat Tamborelli, and Vic Saw. No doubt there will be many more versions of software and lots of new hardware to learn. How fortunate I've been to work with such wonderful chairpersons, both in TME and BMET. These colleagues include Frank Gonzalez, Joanna Staskis, Dominic Orphis, Jean Bonney, John Klages, Ken Craven, June Scott, Joan Monahan, Alexis Thurman, Mark Cosgrove, Tony Cupo, Maureen Sutton, Doreen Sabella, Debbie Poach, Bill Solomon, and Venny Fuentes. Through these many years, I have developed such wonderful, lasting relationships. I've attended marriages of my dear friends' children, Mark Ayres, Michael and Holly Gilbert, Paul and David Holden, Carrie, Jill, and Nancy Monahan, and of course, my own children's weddings. And oh yes, the wedding of dear friends, Joan Monahan and Robert Gebhardt. I have rejoiced in the birth of the children and grandchildren of so many of my colleagues, as well as the birth of our 2 beautiful darlings, Violet June and Ian William. I have been on more committees than I can count and have worked with members from all segments of the campus. The help and support received from these many relationships have made all of the positions I've held fulfilling and worthwhile. I have had a number of administrative assistants and thank them all for making me look so good. Most especially Annette, who has had my back for over a dozen years. Thank you, Annette. We now face cleaning and packing my office. Egad. Last year, I had the pleasure of being faculty marshal at graduation. I felt this to be a real honor. Congratulations to Ellen Masha, who will be this year's marshal. As it was said by my mentor, Marilyn Ayres, on many, many occasions, at CCM we are all about success. For those of you who remain here and who will be here into the future, please take good care of her. She needs and deserves nothing less than your very best. And so I've come full circle. Student, faculty member, and now almost retiree. Here ends my journey through CCM. It's been a terrific ride. Thank you for coming. Thank you all. Let me just clear up the thing about Venny. I just need to do that. Yesterday, he stopped me in my tracks on a way to a meeting and said, well, how many times do you mention me in your talk? Well, at that point, so I needed to make sure. I think it was 3 or 4. Okay, good job. Thank you all, and I love you, I'll miss you, and I'll stop by from time to time. Enjoy your lunch.